Hello comrades and welcome to another video. In this one it will be my next update on the Kherson counteroffensive. And as you can see, there's been literally zero changes since the last update. And that is exactly as I predicted. I said it was going to become or turn into a stalemate. And the reason for that is that we have seen so far from the Ukraine counteroffensive that in the first 3 to 4 days they've achieved nothing but a small beachhead in the center. They are still trying to break through the first line of defense elsewhere, and in the south they are being pushed back and controlled, and the Russians are controlling their advance. So the reason why the Ukrainians are struggling this much is because we can see from the terrain that generally it's good for advances, but only if you have a lot of armored vehicles, which we know that the Ukrainians do not, especially with how they're focusing a lot around Izium area. What's the second thing? The second thing is the fact that there's a lot of rivers in this area, and their main focus was, or their main push was across one, meaning that generally they cannot pass through a lot of units through at one time. They have to cross through a couple of bridges that they've put on the river line, and the only reason they're able to push these units across is because the Russians are actually letting them, meaning that this generally was a trap by the Russians to the Ukrainians. As you can see how they pushed forward and then they were flanked from the side, and now they're being attacked from two sides while they're pushing onwards. So they're essentially putting themselves in a bad position. Now, generally, what we see here was a very risky and NATO-looking push. As we can see, generally these very tight pushes across long distances is exactly what a NATO doctrine looks like. If we look at the maps that the Americans that maps out the American advances, we see that they actually use these very long and tight arcs to encircle the Iraqi forces in 2003. Now, this worked back then because, first of all, this was all a desert and completely open field with no settlements, compared to here in Ukraine where there's a lot of settlements and a lot of roads and so on. And the second reason is that they had complete air support over the area, where the Iraq didn't have an air force at all, at least one that couldn't do anything against the United States, as well as barely any air defense. So the Americans had the ability to have close air support, helicopters and so on, to give them a good viewpoint. And generally they gave them the ability to be conscious about their surroundings and having a good overview of the situation. So generally what we saw was them pushing some kind of blitzkrieg tactic through the Iraqi desert. Similar to that, the Ukrainians tried to achieve some kind of blitzkrieg where they went from the south, pushed towards Pruskinsky and Davidivbrid, and then they encircled Bilohirka, and then they would just push onwards in whatever direction they wanted to go next. But when they went to Pruskinsky, they met such heavy resistance that they weren't able to actually capture the village. So they then decided, okay, we're not going to continue fighting here. We're not able to capture anything here. Then they just went to Kobe and went down in the south, because there's no strategic value in this village, except if they possibly want to either push directly westwards into an open field where Russia has a perfect overview over the situation, move to the east, take the road, or move to the south and take these villages next. But either side of, or either option that follows this is very suicidal for the Ukrainians, as the situation is that that Russia has very good aerial view of the situation, as well as they're covering this whole area with their artillery capabilities, meaning that generally the situation is not really that favorable for the Ukrainians at all. and most likely what we'll be seeing is Ukraine actually being pushed back across the river and back on the north and the south. And there are reports that Russian troops are actually moving on their way to Kherson to reinforce the forces there. So most likely we will actually be seeing a counteroffensive towards Mykolaiv once this offensive is over, as we see that the Ukrainians are actually suffering a lot of losses trying to complete this counteroffensive. So as a result of that, they won't be able to properly defend if Russian reinforcements arrive, meaning that generally we're in a position where the Ukrainian counteroffensive has reached a stalemate and is the definition of failure. And Russians are pulling in more troops, meaning that their counteroffensive looks more and more likely to succeed. As all these lackluster points of the Ukrainian army, Russian army has covered. They have the air superiority, they have the number of troops, they have the number of tanks and so on that they need for a successful counteroffensive. Which is why I see the situation as being very unfavorable for the Ukrainians, because they don't have what they need. Even the Ukrainian General Staff claimed we had 30% of what we need, while the Russians have 100% of what they need. So all they need to do is take the decision to do it. So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching and have a great day.